Well, good evening all. This is Patricia. I'm traveling for history. I'm in Burlington, Vermont. And of course, this mess in front of us here is Burlington High School. This is what is remaining still of it. We can see that most of A building is down because still not all of it. Look in the corner here. See that right there? I'm wagering that's still part of A building. Right there. Yeah. So we can see that most of the rubble from A building has been removed. You may recall this area down here was all rubble just a couple of weeks ago. And it's been cleared out. Those trees that had been obstructing our view have now been taken down. And we can also see, let me see, so this partially demolished building here, that is B building, or well, was B building. So let me tell you a little bit about B building. And I'm going to talk about another building that we can see from here too, which is this building here. That is C building. Anyway, B building, let's talk about that for a moment. Oh, I wanted to mention also that they've also begun remediating the soil underneath the A building. They also have been rinsing off the truck's tires, the 18-wheeler's tires, to make sure that no PCB contaminants leave Burlington High School. Anyway, so B building. What was in B building? Great question. When you walked in on the east end of B building, which would have been on this end here. So when you walked in on the east end, which is the end over on this side, the first door on the left, once you crossed came out of the corridor, freezing cold corridors or the steaming hot corridors, there was really no in-between temp. The first door on the left was the vice principal's office, and I remember Mr. Blanchard standing in his door and smiling and greeting each of us as we came in the morning. On a side note, does anyone know if Mr. Blanchard is still alive? He'd probably be in his 80s or 90s now. Now, before some people scoff and say, no way, I had asked a similar question of a math teacher, and it turned out that he was still alive in 2021, and he was 90. He has since passed, but I did see a wonderful photograph of him where he was smiling and looked very happy, made me happy for him. If you were to continue up the stairs, the library was on the left at the top of the stairs. I spent countless hours in there studying, and just want to speak briefly about a class I had taken. So when I was in high school, freshman year, I took Legal Studies 1, which fell under the history department, and Mrs. Kalinowski was the teacher. We were encouraged to be trial lawyers. I loved being a trial lawyer. I still am very competitive in a variety of ways, and I didn't want to lose my case, any of my cases. So there was a law reference book in the Burlington High School library, and used that for precedents, and I have to say I was very successful. I lost one case, but all the rest I was successful. I have to say, 40-something years later, not real thrilled I lost that one case, but what are you going to do, right? Alrighty. Now, if you were to... oh, and one more story about the library. I almost forgot. So, I believe she was a head librarian, Lorna Cross. Mrs. Cross. Now, I had been in French classes and Latin classes, and I was learning the subjunctive. We don't have that. We don't call it that in the English language. we have that, we have the subjunctive, it's called something else. Anyway, so I was saying, if I were, I would. And I said, oh, and I changed it to was, because I felt kind of embarrassed. Well, Mrs. Cross told me, no, you were right the first time. You were right the first time. If I were. She explained an if clause takes were as the verb. I always appreciated that she would step in like that and correct, nicely correct. So, thank you, Mrs. Cross. Wondering if she's still alive. She would probably be in her, I don't know, 70s to 90s. Not sure how old she was back then. She could have been in her 30s, but she could have been in her 40s too. So, if anyone knows, let me know in the comments below. Now, B Building offered two types of courses taught in there overall. One was art department classes, and the other were the language classes. When I was in high school, the language classes offered were German, Spanish, French, and Latin. I know in the Latin classroom, the teacher in that classroom also taught American literature, and I took that class as well with her. Well, let's talk about that Latin classroom, shall we? I'm thinking it's probably already been demolished, and that is a crying shame. And why? I know you're wondering. Who cares about a Latin classroom, Patricia? And that's because in the Latin classroom, students over the years had painted on the walls vignettes of Roman life. Some were very good. Some were more stick figures that I could do if I had a notion, maybe. There were also Roman sayings on the walls: tempus fugit, non compos mentis. Those two come to mind immediately. Well, the woman who escorted me around A Building back in December 2022, we were emailing first. I told her about those paintings on the walls. She sent me pictures of 3 of them, which is quite nice, and which I appreciated. I did learn later on that a lot of the artwork that was painted on those walls had been cut out of the walls. Someone had dropped a few dimes to the artists and asked if they wanted them, and many did. So the upside is, maybe its upsides are, that those paintings are back with the original creators, and they're not going into the dump. So I appreciate that. It's also highly likely that the woman who escorted me through A Building where I could film was also the same woman who dropped the dimes to those artists from long ago. Here's the thing, though. I was not allowed to film any place but in A Building. Now, I'm pretty sure I found out why just a few weeks ago, whilst filming here, why that was the case. Why I wasn't allowed to film anywhere else at BHS. And it's likely because of all the graffiti on the walls. I had heard that the only building that wasn't marred by graffiti was A Building, which is, of course, where I was allowed to film. But boy, what a huge lost opportunity not to be able to capture all of the interior of BHS. Huge loss. So people in the future know what the darn building looked like inside. But They'll never know that now. All right, well, that's really what I wanted to talk about was B building. Another video is going to be on C building. But this is Patricia. I'm